Hi, I'm Cameron, and I don't just read comics, I love them. On today's episode of Cameron Reads Comics, my friend Russell and I are reading Exit Stage Left, The Snagglepuss Chronicles by Mark Russell and Mike Feehan. This is one of my favorite examples of DC Comics and Hanna-Barbera absolutely crushing it. This is one of my favorite comics, and I was so glad to share it with someone like Russell. Remember, there are going to be full spoilers ahead for Exit Stage Left, The Snagglepuss Chronicles, so you have been warned. Also, stay tuned for next week's episode where Hannah Bader and I talk about our favorite things in the year 2020. There's going to be a super special announcement, so I want to see you there. As always, you can find us on Instagram and Twitter at Cameron Reads Comics, and if you liked this, feel free to leave us a 5-star rating and review on iTunes. Now, here's your episode on Exit Stage Left, The Snagglepuss Chronicles. Drama, comedy, tragedy. For the renowned Southern playwright called Snagglepuss, these are the ingredients that have made him a star of the New York stage and the glittering world that surrounds it. But the year's 1953, and behind the bright lights, darkness is brewing. Snagglepuss is gay, and his enemies are out to destroy him for it. As Snagglepuss prepares for his next hit play, there's already a target on his back. The Red Scare is in full effect, and the House of Un-American Activities Committee is hunting down every last subversive in show business. So far, Snagglepuss has stayed out of their spotlight. One by one, his best friends are being blackballed. From legends like Lillian Hellman and Dorothy Parker to his fellow Southern gentleman, Huckleberry Hound. Can Snagglepuss's reputation survive the rampage of the right wing long enough for him to stage his next masterpiece? One thing's for sure, the show must go on. Hot off his surprise hit reimagining of the Flintstones, writer Mike Russell joins artist Mike Feehan to unleash the fire and fury of his sharp-witted political satire in Exit Stage Left, The Snagglepuss Chronicles. A powerful look at what it means to be an American, no matter who you are. Okay, Russell, welcome. Ooh, we're going to try that again. Okay, Russell, welcome back to the Cameron Reads Comics podcast. We are so glad to have you back, Russell. Hi.
Hi, glad to be here. Feeling like a seasoned vet now.
You are literally a seasoned vet. And you know what's so funny is I've had a lot of conversations lately where people are like, I've been on the podcast multiple times, so I'm basically your co-host. And I'm like, you're in the top tier of guests.
Oh wow, I'm honored. And
I think, what is this time? No,
I think 5. I'm 5 right now. 3 Saga, 1
we stand on
guard, and now here.
Oh my gosh! And this is the first. Is this the first non-Brian K. Vaughan text you've read?
Not that I've been on here for. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You've made me read like Killing Joke and stuff like that.
Oh my gosh!
So.
You know what's so funny about having you on is that like I'm giving you, or at least or just me sharing comics with you, not even having you on the podcast outside of this platform, is sharing the like what I give you to read. I think is just so not the medium. I think I've given you like 2 comics that really are like, you know, traditional comics, which are Batman Killing Joke and then Batman Superman.
Oh, Irredeemable. Oh,
I'll give you Irredeemable too,
and the Batman Superman. I remember that one too now because that's the one we watched the
animated movie.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
It was okay for the listeners. I gave Russell because I love giving him saga. I love giving him stuff, but I wanted to also give him the real bread and butter comic book experience. So I gave him Batman Superman Public Enemies by Jeff Loeb, and there's multiple artists, but it's the first volume. So I think you read Public Enemies, and which is Ed McGuinness, and Michael Turner did art for. Was there a Supergirl story in what you read?
Yes. Okay.
Well, you haven't seen the movie for that yet, and we're gonna make you see the movie for that.
I'm down.
Okay, so we are talking about Exit Stage Left, the Snagglepuss Chronicles, and Russell. Number one. This is, okay, so I've given you a lot of comics that are unlike, the rest of the medium, but this one I feel like is a little different anyways. So before we even get kind of into the text, a little context, how familiar are you with the Hanna-Barbera characters in the cartoons?
As far as the ones in this comic,
yeah,
0% familiar. I had no clue who anyone was.
That is so funny. And I'm not a huge animation nerd, but I do kind of we've talked multiple times, but I'm just in love with the context of all of it. So seeing this, knowing who Snagglepuss was before this, and then there's so many characters too. Like Huckleberry Hound is a very famous Hanna-Barbera cartoon. The horse in the text was his name's Quick Draw McGraw. And
Augie Doggy. I remember the names, but I don't know the context at all.
Yeah. I think that, so you weren't familiar at all. What's crazy about this is that here's some publishing content, I guess. So DC Comics owns or is owned by Warner Brothers, and so obviously that's why you're seeing all the DC movie universe, and that's why you're seeing a lot of the other stuff. What am I trying to say? DC owns that, and so they've done a lot of crossovers. And actually, this book caught me off guard because I read it because I heard it was really good, and I'm kind of just an open-minded comic book fan. I'm if there's hype, I'll read anything really. And so the guy who wrote this, Mark Russell, wrote this. He wrote a Flintstone series that's actually I started it. Probably it's 12 issues. I think I read the first 8. It is insane. It's his social commentary is incredible, and so seeing the direction that they take these characters just blows my mind because they did another one, or at least another collab, where Elmer Fudd and Batman meet. Have I told you about this?
Yeah, you told me about that briefly. Yeah,
that is literally the best. I think it came out in 2017. I think that is the best single issue I read in 2017, and this one totally caught me off guard. I remember I was reading it on a flight home when I lived in the Midwest, and I'd fly home winter breaks and stuff. And I was like, okay, I got time. 6 issues, I'll bust through it. I was like, okay, issue 1's okay. And then by issue 4, I'm like, oh my gosh, please, plane, do not land. I just need to be immersed with this. And so all of the collabs that they've done have been so crazy and so good. I just wanted to let you know that. I guess there's some context.
I know, yeah. I would definitely be down to read more of it, especially things that maybe I'd have a little bit more of the Flintstones or whatever, This one was for sure super. I think even just knowing that these are cartoon characters is enough, that was enough for me to, okay, I get what's going on here. But yeah, definitely, that's kind of amazing. Elmer Fudd meeting Batman.
Yeah, well, and it's the way I just think about it, and really the posture I came into with this one, it's something that I feel shouldn't work, but totally does. I don't know how they make it work as well as they do, but it just works. Mm-hmm. And I feel that when I'm pitching this book to someone and I'm like, hey, you should really check this out. I'm like, okay, so Snagglepuss, the old cartoon? They're like, no, and I'm like, well, go on YouTube for 2.5 seconds and you'll find him. Okay, now imagine he is the world's most famous playwright. The world's most famous playwright, and he is going to be associating with communists, and then they try and blacklist him and la la la. Does that sound like the character or a comic you want to read? It's just I don't know. And then you read it and it's what?
Yeah. Yeah, there's something sort of almost meta about the move itself.
Yeah.
Because it feels read this book about these cartoon characters acting like normal people, and you're like, what? Okay, I'll read it because that sounds super strange. And it's that's the almost reason for you to get invested in the story itself. And it feels almost that's a reflection of the commentary on the playwrights here and their plays being a means. It's a guise of entertainment, but a means to express, the deeper value and meaning of whatever they have, their struggles and their sorrows going on.
Yeah, and we're really gonna dig into that before we get into the rest of the story. How did you feel about, or do you know too much about the Beatniks generation, or were you super familiar? Because you are the biggest. I'd argue in my circle of friends, you are the biggest like prose enthusiast that I've ever just had the pleasure to talk to about just great works.
Well, you must not know too many people.
I don't. I'm like, that's true. I'm like, Russell, I literally only read books with pictures.
Yeah, so I'm a snob when it comes to literature.
Good.
Which I don't have any right to be at all. But like, I feel like I always like jokingly say, but there's a lot of truth to it. Like, I won't read a book if it's over 50 years, unless it's over 50 years old.
So this was the first for you.
Well,
I'm
no,
kidding.
but comic books different. It's
Obviously.
yeah. But so the Beatnik whole generation, it's over 50, right? But it's close enough that I'm like, I like going into the give me Jane Austen. Like, I need to be that far in the past. Like, the closest I get is like Hemingway, and that's pretty close, right?
Is that 50?
Yeah, I mean,
by this point,
but
shoot.
he's like lost generation. So he's not the right era, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I don't really know. I'm not researched. I'm not really well read on the Beatniks at all. Is that something that
yes. That's, as an angsty high schooler, Russell has seen me through peak angst and multiple haircuts in my years. And so I think that taking a modern literature class and kind of really wanting to be, I guess, alternative and just, what's the word? It always comes to me just kind of like in opposition to, I guess, rebellious. But being a rebellious teen, I was looking for something that's contrary to culture, and then obviously you stumble upon through school the Beatniks. And so my number one favorite is Allen Ginsberg, and especially if you guys need a poem to read, I'd really recommend. He has one called America. It is in his book called Howl, and I was just like, oh my gosh, I love his prose and his knowledge. And then, every young man wants to live the Jack Kerouac fantasy on the road. And I just found like this kinship to these contrarians to culture and rejecting, really rejecting the pop norms. And I felt that in this text. And that's why I was like, I think there's another kinship that I have to this, what we're reading. But I should really just give you a copy just to loan is Ed Piskor, he's kind of a comic book historian. He does like histories of events. Notoriously, he did an X-Men history, which really is a group that needed it. But he did one on the Beats. One of his first published works was on the Beats, and I actually reread it probably last year. And it is just a visual history of like Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, and a bunch. And it was really good. It's really beneficial. So I just feel very kin to, I guess, writers within this generation that this book is taking place. And so I find that very personal, and that's why I guess I really wanted to talk about this text too, and kind of get into that.
That I do remember angsty Cam, definitely.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, that's great. I mean, I feel like I understand more why you like recommended this to me, probably just because being within that, not that I'm a beatnik or something, but like
Russell is a beatnik.
I feel like I like those literary generations a lot, and I respect those, And
yeah, and you and I think we were talking before we recorded, but the Kierkegaard references and
the Nietzsche references.
And the Nietzsche, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's a little. I like that. I think Snagglepuss in this text was kind of a little. There was some arrogance radiating off of him,
oh, for sure,
and elitism, but also just like this earnestness. And I think I realized in my creatives, I do like a little arrogance because they double down on their perspective, and I think that's why we go in. That's why we participate in their art, because I'm like, I want to hear what you have to say, or like how you express your belief, within this. And so I think I liked that he did that, and I liked how he kind of was trying to pigeonhole other artists.
Yeah. Totally.
Okay, so next question, or I guess the first question always, what did you think? Did you like it? How did we feel about what we just read?
Yeah, I would say that as I kept going, I liked it more and more. Like, it really grew on me. And I became more invested in the characters. And I think at first you're like sort of hesitant, and you're like, it's hard to adapt to. There's Snagglepuss is talking to a dog about wanting to be a playwright
Yeah.
now, like what's happening. But as it goes on, like the characters, what's amazing is how human the characters are, no matter what their form is, whether or not they resemble a horse or not.
And they even kind of touched in on that, which I'm like, ugh.
Yeah, it's really compelling, and the storyline and the characters, it's just very authentic.
Yeah.
And dealing through, the whole McCarthyism era, that's, important. It's important to reflect upon. I think while I was reading, the thing that struck me the most was like how unfamiliar I was with that whole McCarthy era, really.
Yeah.
Like, you learn about it in school, but it's not something that I've really gone out and done a ton more research on.
I thought you were gonna not something I've gone out and tried to really invest, like accuse people of being communists, and I'm like, I mean, like you probably shouldn't, but do what you want, man.
That's the only way to relate is to accuse people yourself. But because like even there was a moment when I had to do a quick literary research. Who's this Arthur guy? Like when we'll get to that, but
yeah,
I was like, who are they talking about here? I don't know Marilyn Monroe's history here. What's going on?
I had to look that up too.
But and even like moments like that, it's like, wow, like, it sort of reveals how maybe the human tendency to forget about some historical periods that are not so bright, especially for the United States or something. So,
well, that kind of relates to what we were talking about, in the last book we read.
Yeah. And so, yeah, exactly. So I really liked it because of that, because it's like, it's so clear the analogy that's being painted. I mean, it's not even really an analogy. It's kind of the same thing as that McCarthy era. But I was really invested in how the characters were dealing with those issues and just that problem, of like the whole communist scare and the blacklisting and everything. Like, wow, this is something that I forget about. I don't really think about this often. But
yeah, it was. I just found that I like that, it participated with the history, in some ways we read a lot of fantastical stuff where their own historical narrative is built and, by the writer. But this one is like really very cool because we get to see these characters that kind of, I guess, already had existed on their own in their own cartoons, in their own lineages, that they exist on their own. But now we get to see them interact with, the world, maybe not as we like it, but I just thought it was really cool. It was really well done.
Yeah, it's what's really cool too is it's a little bit, they quote, like, we'll get to the whole Arthur Miller thing, but they quote like the Crucible, right?
Oh, I didn't even notice that.
Oh, really?
We'll
the
get
Crucible?
there.
Oh, that was really cool. Yeah.
Well, no, just say it now.
Yeah, so
here,
he's it's when they're in like that one party at the end, and he's talking about his.
Oh my gosh!
His play, and he's like, "Oh, it's a metaphor for McCarthyism in the Salem witch trials or whatever."
I can't believe that Arthur Miller's in this, and I did not see the allusions to the Crucible. Oh my goodness! My senior year English teacher is like really yelling at this because she listens. But
yeah, I mean.
Okay, what was the quote though? I think I interrupted you.
Well, no, it wasn't as much a quote, but it's like you think of the Crucible and you think, okay, these are characters living in a whole different world.
Yeah.
But have, they're analogous for what's going on in the McCarthy era, right?
Yeah.
But Snagglepuss is a little different because these are characters living in the actual McCarthy era. Yeah. Just McCarthy's not called McCarthy anymore. But it's like, here's Snagglepuss, here's Richard Nixon.
Yeah.
It's like they're both right. It's like here's Snagglepuss and Richard Nixon a panel apart. That's fun to see.
With Arthur Miller, I just thought that was so smart, and I'm really into that. Oh my gosh, that poll, and I think you're right too. I think also the buildup that you see kind of is Mark Russell's response to that generation, where he's like, when Snagglepuss says, "I'm not the one on trial here, you guys are." Mm-hmm. It was just so good.
Yeah, that almost felt like the author saying, like, if I was in the shoes of someone who was on trial here, what would I say? That, it felt like this very authentic moment of like words almost through Snagglepuss from the author,
What you see too, and I think what the author demonstrates really well is kind of what you're referring to as, and your experience with the McCarthy era is like not being as familiar. I think what we see in this text is a very tangible, real way to have to gain perspective on like actual feelings that people were feeling in, you know, those times.
Yeah, totally.
Through Snagglepuss and through Huckleberry Hound.
Mm-hmm.
Huckleberry Hound was like, okay, who's your favorite character? Because Huckleberry Hound was mine.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
You know what? That's like that's pretty tough for me. I think I enjoyed a lot of the different character arcs here. It's like a three-way tie, sort of.
Who is it? Yeah, who are you three?
It's a tie between I think just Snagglepuss as a character I really enjoyed.
He was so charming.
It's probably honestly it's just Snagglepuss.
Yeah.
Like the other two but I feel weird. I want to be like super like I'm not picking the main character.
I love,
you know.
That's the constant answer I get with that question, and I'm like, let's just say it, because Lauren Bear and I like read Catwoman, and there's not too many other characters in it, and it's like my favorite character was Selena, and I'm like, that's okay.
yeah. So you know what? It's probably just Snagglepuss. Yeah. I love the wittiness of him, and I loved that he was kind of like a smartass and kind of an elitist at times.
Yes.
But then also like so caring for his friends. Here's Huckleberry Hound. I haven't seen you in a year, right? Isn't that like the back story of that?
Yeah.
And then he's like, oh, but you're my friend. And here, come let me show you around the city. And oh, like something really bad just happened to you. Here, come live with me. I insist that needs to happen.
Yeah.
You know, it's like that's cool. And even like the Augie Doggy part of that, where he's like,
once he was giving, you know, first chances to everyone.
Yeah, it was amazing. Like, because he realized where he came from and his like really humble roots, and he didn't leave those. He didn't become this total elitist who can't associate with the normal public. Now he's like still talking to the random people on the street, asking them questions and getting them gigs. You know, even the octopus dude, like, oh, you're the new whatever stage manager or whatever it is, you know, like that's I really liked the combination of the elitist aspects with the more humble, kind of caring, compassionate aspects a lot.
Yeah, and you know, it's a fun fact for maybe the listeners, but Russell, I guess for you love Lin-Manuel Miranda. And did you? I don't know. Do you have Hulu? Oh, you have my Hulu.
I do have your Hulu.
Okay, I don't know if you watched it yet, but you need to go watch on Hulu Freestyle Love Supreme, the documentary.
Okay.
Because that is where Lin-Manuel Miranda got his start. Okay. It's okay, so I used to be on an improv troupe. Big shout out to Some Assembly Required in Cedar Falls, Iowa. But I was a part of that improv group, and I don't know what happened, but I got really fascinated into just improv culture, and I found that Freestyle Love Supreme is a improvisational hip hop group, and so literally they just improv rap. They're just freestyling, you know.
Yeah.
And you find out that Lin-Manuel Miranda was a founding member, and then he carried that over, obviously using those skills. And you'll see him in interviews and stuff. Go look up Lin-Manuel Miranda freestyle rap because he can do it all day long. But a bunch of people from that group he brought into Hamilton and in the Heights, and like that's how he got so successful. And so it is so good. But you see that, you know, similarly to Snagglepuss, and I just thought A Modern Playwright, obviously a very popular one, would be a good example. But you see Snagglepuss bringing along his friends.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? In the same way, which I think makes the work more personal, you know, in what he's doing. And you kind of find out the last play that he's been working on the entire time is Huckleberry Hound's story.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love the Lin-Manuel comparison because I think you're so right. Like, you know, you watch Moana, and Moana's dad is like George Washington. You're like,
oh, really?
Yeah, totally.
Look at this. Russell's taking me to school.
And so you're like, oh, yeah, like Lin's bringing on, you know, he's giving gigs to his friends because he loves them and he's loyal to them. Or at least that's what I want to believe in my heart.
That's
you know?
exactly. No, it is because, you know, what's his face? One guy, oh, my gosh. My favorite guy in Freestyle Love Supreme, he's, I won't remember his name. I'll look it up later. But one guy in that was going to be who's Lamar Odom Jr. or Leslie Odom Jr.
Yeah.
Who did he play?
Aaron Burr.
He was going to be Aaron Burr,
but
he kind of couldn't get his act together at the time, and he lost out on that because that was who Lin-Manuel Miranda intended to, but the guy couldn't get his act together, and they play it out in the documentary, and it's really well done. But it's just like he's like, I had to live with that. You know, oh, you remember that little musical called Hamilton? I didn't get to be a part of that because I couldn't get my stuff together. And it's, you know, obviously one of his biggest regrets of all time.
Yikes.
But
well, I'm going to have to use your Hulu to watch this thing.
The best part of Russell getting in my Hulu was that I was like, give him my password because, you know, that's what friends do. And then I got a notification. I was like, you know, because usually if it's only one person on it, I'll go through. But I got a notification that Karen had made an account. And I was like,
That's my mother.
Heck yes.
Yeah, it was.
And Russell's like,
I would just watch on the Karen Miller account. And my mom was totally just like, I
it was like on the TV, you know?
Bless her soul. She just thought Hulu appeared and was given to us by the gods. And so she's like, oh, I'm making my account here. Karen. And so you log into the Hulu and it says Cameron or Karen. Those are the two options.
And I was like, heck yes. So that's every time I go on Hulu now, that's my options. And I just love it. Okay, next question. So actually, I want to go into Huckleberry Hound because that's my favorite character. Mm-hmm. I just thought that everything he brought to these scenes was so well done. Mm-hmm. Like, as a story, like, catalyst, just his character moved so much stuff, like, forward. It added so much depth and, like, personality. And I think that you and I talk about, or especially when we get to Why the Last Man, but we talk about meaningful deaths within stories. Mm-hmm. And, you know, Brian K. Vaughan is obviously, we talk about his use of, you know, tragedy to propel narrative is just really well done. I think Huckleberry Hound was the most perfect example of that, mm-hmm. you know, and I think that his death used to catapult Snagglepuss into giving the House of Un-American Activities Committee, like, what they deserved. I just thought that was like chef's kiss. Because I remember reading that on the plane and I was like, that whole scene when he's in the meeting and, you know, oh, you guys didn't know that he was dead? Like, all mm-hmm. of it was so well done.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely, I felt like when I was reading, I don't know if you felt like this, but it felt to me like, you know, I was reading some, like, we'll use the Shakespeare analogy. It's like I'm reading Hamlet and I know I'm reading a tragedy. For Huckleberry Hound, I felt like from the moment I met him as a character, it's like, I don't know. I think something tragic's going to happen with this character here. Just the way it was set up. And I mean, the way he's presenting himself too as sort of like a deeply lonely, depressed character who was ostracized from his family and, you know, can't find love because society doesn't allow him to find love.
Yeah.
I just thought that was like deeply tragic in a way in which it felt like, oh, the tragedy is going to follow through here. And when it did at the end, with him, you know, committing suicide after he's exposed, it felt like it had to happen in some way to reveal the tragic nature of that era. And you're absolutely right that, you know, because even right before Snagglepuss finds out that Huckleberry Hound killed himself, he says, you know what, I'm going to go play ball with these guys because I want to save my friend. And it is, you know, there's something like moving and super tragic about, oh, it had to be through a death and through the death of his best friend here that he was willing to actually say the things that needed to be said.
Okay, and that actually brings me to one of my favorite questions, and I think one of the best characters in the story, which was the woman that we were following. Her name, oh my gosh, I'm pulling it up right now, Gigi Allen. Mm-hmm. I thought that Gigi Allen was one of, again, I think so many characters in this story were so good. I think Gigi Allen's character was magnificent. Mm-hmm. Like, I couldn't have imagined a better character myself, and I think the real kicker is when you find out that she's either a lesbian or bisexual, but when you find out that she is literally trying to she ruins 2 lives pretty much in this process, and that she is someone who is, you know, I guess living in those same secrets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a moment where I sort of like, in my heart, I wanted that to be the case, that the hypocrisy was there, and then when it was, it was so satisfying, mm-hmm. you know, because it felt like that's exactly what he, even with the, you know, Nixon, mm-hmm. and the what's his
Khrushchev.
I can never pronounce it because come on, too many
There's a lot of letters
sounds all in a row. But like just it's almost like two sides that are sort of similar, even though they're fighting together, you know?
Oh, yeah.
And that's totally revealed through Gigi as the McCarthy character, who's trying to condemn everyone, and uses the homosexual side of Huckleberry Hound to just totally ruin him and try to ruin Snagglepuss. But then she shares a similarity with them in that, you know? And it was really beautifully done, I thought, showing how these two sides, like she even uses her own similarity with the other side in order to condemn the other side. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and that's how I think when it comes to like perfect villains, I just think she was a perfect villain.
Yeah.
You know, when she actually now I really want to ask, like, how did you feel about the leading into that? I think it led into the most perfect. I think the raid was one of my favorite scenes. I think that honestly, that might be my favorite moment of the entire thing, which is, but it's also obviously one of the deepest tragedies within the entire thing. When you see Quick Draw McGraw, like, you know, I think he just kind of beats the rest out of Huckleberry Hound, and like that. I think that's when he found. I think that was. I don't know if the public shaming was hurt him as much as Quick Draw McGraw. Like, you know, obviously drawing his line in the sand and choosing a side.
Yeah, it felt like it was like the combination of maybe the public shaming, but also like the whole time he's like, oh, I'm lonely. I'm deathly lonely and I can't find love. And then it's like he reaches that stage where he's like, oh, guess what? Like, I'm not lonely. I feel the happiest I've ever felt. And then the person who's making him feel the happiest he's ever felt kind of not only betrays him, but like literally smacks him with a nightstick, you know? Like,
and he just freaking calls him the F word, smacks him with I was like, oh, and just because I was reading digitally. I don't know if it was how it was set up on the page, but I go panel by panel when I read digitally. And so it was one panel of like, oh, nice to see you, officer. And then the next one was absolutely red, you know, blood. The horse, Quick Draw McGraw was like, oh, it was crazy.
Yeah. I think it was next page. Like
I was like, you got the surprise. Yeah. I'm like, oh my gosh. I just think there's so many scenes in this thing that just lined up perfectly.
Yeah, that was a really good scene. I agreed. Like just that whole, again, it's the like hypocrisy of, or I guess being pitted on different sides, but sharing that it is hypocrisy, right? Because he's calling him out for the same thing. I mean, that he is, right? Or you know, but yeah, just that kind of tension between the opposite sides and the pressure, you know, exerted by the police force on. You know, I felt bad for him. I felt like, you're a coward in the situation for sure, but I felt really bad for him because, you know, there's so many external pressures on Quick Draw McGraw that it's like, oh, wow, this is a pretty nuanced situation. It's not that clear cut, you know?
Yeah, I think people want to, you know, I think it'd be easy to call him spineless or something, but I don't know if I feel that way about him. I think that, you know, they were a new love and he was, you know, I think on his shoulders he had generations of his family, and also just the interpersonal fear of, you know, what are these other cops going to think about me?
Yeah, totally.
But then I think we have the reward at the end where he gets busted anyways, no matter what.
Yeah, it's like the futility of even putting that face on in the first place.
Oh, look at that nice use of the word futility.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm like, wow.
Thank you, Cameron.
You're so welcome. Okay, what about were you a fan of the brief cameos of the other? Okay, so obviously this interacted with history, but how did you feel about the other cameos? The Marilyn Monroe, the Joe DiMaggio. You know what I looked up is Clint Eastwood. Oh, he's the guy that got fired.
Yeah, I had to verify that in my head.
Too.
The artist did such a good job of drawing Clint Eastwood, to where like they had that. I was like, if this is someone, it's Clint Eastwood, right? And then I like looked up. Well, how did you look that up to verify? I actually looked it up and then I didn't verify, but I was like, it's Clint Eastwood, just because they said westerns.
Well, when they said that I really also liked, and then this goes back to Snagglepuss's arrogance, but I like that he said there's a difference between actors and stars. And he said, I think you'd rather be a star. And then he says, I want you to do the breathy thing like that Marilyn does. And
a
then
little pouty look.
Yeah, exactly. And then they're like, okay, you're going to go into the next thing we see is he's in a Western. And I'm like, let me look at that. And then they actually did the mole on his face just right.
Did they? Yeah.
And that's really what I verified.
Okay. Yeah, that was really nice. They had a little jab at Clint Eastwood too. They said something like, stars are more two-dimensional or something.
Oh, yeah.
But if you think about it, like, yeah, that rings true.
I actually have a quote to read, kind of, because of when him and Huckleberry Hound are on the talk show. That's actually here. Maybe here's another question I have, but I thought this book was the most quotable. I think when I think of literally just quotable texts, I think that the language written throughout the series was just masterful.
Yeah.
And so, sorry for everyone's hearing my chair squeak. That's just, that's budgeting on a podcast. But with that, him on the talk show, I think he said one of the most beautiful quotes, and I want to read it on air because I just thought it was that well done. But it says, every character, no matter how unlikable, needs to be loved, if only by its creator. Because we're all loved, despite each of us being despicable in our own way. We are each a play unto ourselves. Though alone on stage, we find consolation in those who have been played the role before us. In the end, what makes a character meaningful isn't what's unique about them, but what's common. And I thought that was such a universal theme throughout the text. Yeah. And I think you're right about the really meta situation going on within the text of, I don't say goodbye, I always exit the stage left, or them talking about us as a play, and really leaning into what is art and what is subversive, and I just thought it was really well done.
Yeah, I love that. I love that theme that's revealed in the quote of the tragedy of man. The commonality and whatever you want to call it. Like regret, sin, wrongdoing, whatever it is, like that is actually the common thing that links people together, is that we all can relate to being the despicable one or something, like as he's talking about his characters. Yes. That's what the talk show host calls them. He reacts against a word. What was the word?
It's like despicable, or like, how you're he's talking about his characters just being completely unlikable.
Yeah. And he says they're not unlovable, they're despicable, but they are loved by me, right? Isn't that what he says?
They're loved by me, but because us as creatures are, no matter how bad we are loved by someone.
Yeah. And it's that, it's a kind of that balance, right? Of the tension which I think is, just true. The tension we feel in our own lives because we're in our own thoughts and in our own mind of the things that we wish we were that we're not, and knowing that in spite of that, and sometimes because of that, people are willing to, be vulnerable and accept us for who we are, and like that whole loving connection through brokenness, I thought was very apparent, especially within the Snagglepuss Huckleberry Hound relationship, and was like, I think just true.
Yeah, and there's something too that they can see, because I think Huckleberry Hound is also maybe a really big example, because they come from kind of the same place, and maybe Snagglepuss got out a little bit earlier and he had a better deal of cards, but they come from the same place, and maybe Huckleberry Hound is kind of really He's demonstrating externally what is going on in Snagglepuss internally, and that's maybe why he wrote the play. And you see it. I thought that play was so good. Like the sequence of the play going on and the trial going on was insane. I thought that was like when there's a panel of them taking their bows with the masks on, or like the animal gear, and I just thought that was so. I was like, with the text overlapping, I was like, man, this is really, it hit me the same way it hit me the first time I read it.
Yeah. No, it was, that was really nice. And just kind of getting they really, don't even reveal that it's the play of their story till the end. You see, like, in the beginning, you see the blue dog nose on the one actor, but
Clint.
Yeah, but you're not really connecting it, until you see both the characters on stage at the end there. Yeah, it's really tastefully done, I thought.
Yeah, or even like, when he says, when he's like, how could one character be like this pathetic or this pitiful?
Mm-hmm.
And then he's like, I have someone I want you to meet. And then they go out with, and for the very first time you see Huckleberry Hound, like kind of come onto a guy and then just get punched in the face. And it's oh, brutal.
And they're all like, don't do that.
Yeah, they're like, that's not how we do it.
It's not going to work out.
What did he say? He's like, did you just go out for a walk tonight, or was it a pilgrimage of the flesh? And I'm like, oh my gosh.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, bro, also, like, want to use that term in my life at any point.
Or is yours a pilgrimage of the flesh?
I'm like, I was like, dang. I was like, very quotable. I have so many quotes written down from this as I just like look at my notes. Okay, Russell, I got a couple more questions for you, and then we're just about done. Probably 3 more. At the end of the story, Snagglepuss makes his case to the House of Un-American Activities Committee, and he kind of really leans into the point of art being subversive. How do you feel about that? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I mean, I think in the context, you're very inclined to agree with it because it's within this McCarthy trial going on. And so, yeah, you want to... But, I mean, I think... So, like, yeah, that idea of art is showing the weakness in culture, the weakness in the... Or, like, even the wrongdoings of culture. I mean, I think that's... If you think about it like that, that feels like that's true. Like that needs to be the role, the freedom of art to do so. Like, I mean, there's a lot of, the one that immediately comes to mind is like 1984 or something, right? Like, I mean, it's showing another culture's wrongdoings, or another philosophy.
Oh, another deleted no, I'm thinking of Animal Farm.
I mean, same thing though.
Mm-hmm. I haven't read 1984, so I can tell you.
It's same principle, essentially. But just that, I mean, those works have stood the test of time and are really important and are fundamentally based on showing how some system of thinking or some thing that's happening in real life is dangerous, and it feels like that is the role of art to some extent. Maybe not its only role. Well, probably certainly not its only role, but a role of art. And I think the point was to limit or to censor art's ability to critique culture never leads you down a very good path. So I don't know. I think that point seems pretty valid. What did you think about that?
I thought that it was really, really, really well done. I think that he makes you're right about it being in the circumstances, of him saying it, the actions that have dictated, obviously, that frame of mind was really well done. And I think that it's important to note that was really well done. And it makes you agree. So I think that with that in particular, I think he makes the right point. And I think it is correct. It's when that you try and dictate the creativity of a nation. And Richard Nixon says that in this text, and whether or not entirely agree with him, in the nature of that conversation, I do agree with how
that was an amazing conversation.
It was really just so good. I think that.
Sorry, I didn't mean to rail.
No, you're good. I'm still figuring out how I feel about it, but with Richard Nixon talking about it and the rest, I just think that him in that, or Snagglepuss's point being art being subversive, I think that's it, but I don't know if I agree that that's the only purpose, you know what I mean, or that's the sole purpose. I think that it does demonstrate the culture and it does critique, but I think that also there's points too where it celebrates, and I think that that's really about as much as I feel about it.
Yeah, I agree that it feels like that is a role of art, but not the role of art. Maybe.
Yeah, but again, it's why I like that character, that he makes those big claims, and I wanna hear what he has to say about it. That's why we I think subscribe to art to hear those critical lenses. And obviously why I guess I'm in love with this text too, because it is a critical lens. Okay, so how did you feel about the end when you find out that the man that he keeps visiting in the old folks home, or I think it's like it might be a mental hospital or a retirement home or whatever, you find out that that's his father? Were you surprised by that? Did you like that?
I was not that surprised by that. I think that the text does a really good job of kind of leading you to natural places to where you can kind of see it coming, but the payoff is still there when you get there. It's not like cheap or anything.
Yeah.
So I think I sort of saw it coming, but it was... I thought the ending was really, really nice. Like, I loved kind of the theme of regret that was weaved in this text, and I love that you get that in the end with his father when he asks him, like, "Oh, is there something that you would say to your son now?"
Yeah.
And he's like, "Oh, it's too late for that." But then he kind of says, I'm paraphrasing, but says, like, man, like, who can undervalue what a son means to a father, and kind of says that point home, or drives that point home of like, man, like, I wish I would have understood that my son was my son first and foremost, and that was foundational to anything. And yeah, I loved that because you get to see the truth of his father as this person with, dementia or whatever it is, who can't remember who his son is, at least the older version of his son. And so there's an honesty and authenticity about that. And you see that in his character, that he's very like, not PC. I don't know. He's very like, harsh with his words at times, but brutally honest in revealing who he is. But then at the same time, you can hold that in the balance with, and even though like he was probably a really bad father in a lot of ways, you can still see, but he has regret in there.
Yeah.
And he wishes he could have done a few things differently. I love that.
I'm always trying to, I guess, piece my words together here with you, but I think I agree, obviously, that it ties it back into the theme of kind of the quote I read, where it's like, nobody is quite despicable because they are loved. You know what I mean? Because I think no matter what, he still loved his father to the point where we saw it demonstrated. And you see that he was rejected by him, but his father was regretful about how, I guess, their relationship, the turn that it took.
Yeah.
So that was really cool to see. I liked it. And I'm also glad that he we got to see him be this larger-than-life character, obviously, in the public eye, and then we got to see... this story did a really great job of kind of fulfilling the promises that it gave us, because at the very beginning he says, you don't know who a person is. They love me, but they don't even know me, because you don't know who a person is until you see like all sides of them. And then we got to see him be the larger-than-life playwright. We got to see him be a best friend, and then we kind of got to see him be a son. So we saw all the sides of him.
Yeah. And
I think that's why, I guess, we have a more full picture of why we like him and we understand him. So I thought that scene I think it was necessary.
Yeah. That's really good too. That even reminds me of the part where he's talking to Marilyn Monroe, just like privately. And as on his way out, he says like, "Oh, thanks," or something like that. And then he's like, "Thank you for letting me see your full self," essentially is what he says to Marilyn Monroe. And it's like, oh yeah, that you can see that's what he values. And as a reader, we are getting to slowly see the full self of Snagglepuss as the comic goes on, which I think that's really nicely done.
Yeah, and I think that we got to see that a little bit better too. I thought that I think the Joe DiMaggio Marilyn Monroe thing, I think there could have been room for us to really not like it. Mm-hmm. But I think it was really well done because of a moment like that, where I also really, really, really just loved it when he said, "Oh, have fun with basketball." And I was like, yeah, that was just so good. But I think that moment could have been a little too much fan service, but I don't think it was. I think it walked that line very delicately and landed on its feet.
Well, what I loved about the Joe DiMaggio part too is he's not really necessarily talking. I mean, he is talking about him being a famous baseball player, but one of the main things that he's driving home is Joe DiMaggio talking about his parents being immigrants and feeling like he doesn't belong. You know, like that's not normative baseball knowledge of Joe DiMaggio.
Yeah, that's not how we think about him.
Exactly. So I loved that because it was like I did a little research of Joe DiMaggio. Like, what the heck? Like, oh yeah, his parents were immigrants from Italy or whatever it was, and that was really nice to take a famed, beloved, you know, American icon that makes it into the song Mrs. Robinson, like, you know, and then just to like humanize him and to say, oh, he feels like he doesn't belong here. And it was, and with the Marilyn Monroe thing too, of humanizing Marilyn Monroe, and oh, I feel like I just need to be this icon to everyone. I'm just this symbol. I'm Marilyn, you know.
Yeah.
And, it did a good job of not just being fan service of, oh, look, famous people, but like actually contributing them to the larger theme of what was going on.
Okay, Russell, last question. What would you rate this story out of 10?
Very good question. I thought about this. I don't remember what I like rated past things, and I want to like put it within my...
You're so funny. You know what? You don't have to do that, because the way I think about this is I take the story for what it is and like the story that it went out to tell. You know what I mean? I'm like, because I'm like, I've given Saga 10s. I've given my favorite 10 I've given probably is Unbeatable Squirrel Girl. I think that's also a 10 because, you know, the story that it set off to tell, they did that well.
Mm-hmm.
So honestly, Snagglepuss is a 10 for me. I was going to be like, 9.2 upon the first couple issues, but then, you know, you hit it deeper at the very end, and I'm like, that's perfect. I'm like, I think this story was perfect, and I was so surprised by it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is very much along the lines of this story had no right being as good as it was.
Yeah. I think I'll go 8.9. That's my ranking. Because I'm pretty sure like I gave Saga like not a 10, like a 9.5.
Yeah.
And I'm still cognizant of that.
Yeah,
I can't grade it above Saga.
That's okay.
But I was thoroughly, I mean, it did a really good job of like creeping up on you of like, okay, I'm reading about cartoon characters. Oh, wait, all this crazy stuff's happening.
Yeah.
And it relates to like, oh, here's Richard Nixon. That's crazy, you know, and here's Joe DiMaggio. And I loved that. And like the kind of just the theme of everything that was, you know, the subversive, you know, art and all that stuff. Loved that.
Yeah. And I just think that it is one of the holy grails of, you know, indie comics. Like, I just, you know, the principle, I feel like, of this story is almost silly, but then it is executed so well. Like, it takes a concept that could have been very silly, and it takes it so seriously, and it's a case of that. When you treat something, you know, when a creator is treating their characters like they matter, mm-hmm. I'm invested, you know. I'm like, wow. And so I've been actually reading a bunch of his stuff. He's been doing a couple Batman comics lately that have just like one single issue stories on, if you guys have DC Universe or DC Universe Infinity, and they are doing digital exclusive Batman comics. And Mark Russell's been kind of tackling some of them, and they're pretty good. So check it out. He did the Flintstones, and he did Wonder Twins that I'm actually going to read, because that is another silly kind of character, but I think he's gonna like just blow me away.
Very nice. Yeah.
So there we go. Russell, thank you so much for being on the podcast. We're always so glad to have you. For my listeners, please stay tuned for next week when we are going to have Hanna Bader back on the podcast to go over our favorite things of the year. So you're not going to want to miss out on that. And you want to hear that episode because we have a very, very exciting announcement. So stick around. It's going to be very cool. And then always remember to go follow Cameron Reads Comics on Instagram. And please, please, please leave me a 5-star rating and review on iTunes. That will help me out, and that will help Russell get some more comics in his hands. Once again, Russell, so glad to have you. Hope to have you back soon. And actually, we were talking about what you're going to read next, and it is going to be big blockbuster comics. So thank you, Russell. See you soon.